Would you be prepared to vote yes to the House bill as is? And if not, what changes do you need to see?
Well, that's a really great question. I think I start with a yes vote. I think, Kailey, that's where I begin. I want this to pass, but there's no reason that the Senate should just simply rubber stamp it when we can do so much better, in my view. I think it was interesting listening to the leader from the House say that they hope we don't, they don't think there's any way to find more savings, and I think that's really the thing we have to do. We will not be able to pass the bill without finding some more spending cuts, to Eric's point, by the way, in the piece, and I think he summarized it very, very well. And we can do that without going after Medicaid benefits, but we ought to go after some of these schemes around the country where individual states are using Medicaid to pad their own state pocketbook rather than actually providing the services. So there's things we can do. Salt, she brought up salt. She hopes we don't reduce salt. Well, it went from $10,000 to $40,000 of deductibility. It seems to me that anything over 10 should be something that a moderate from New York would like. So maybe we can bring it to 30 or 20. I do think, though, by and large, it will look similar to the House bill, but we just may be able to find some other places for savings and maybe make some of those tax policies permanent, by the way, that you talked about up front. I mean, the biggest piece of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act from 2017 that we need to fix is to make those tax cuts permanent. Those are pro-growth tax cuts, and if we want to make a dynamic economy even more dynamic, I think that's got to be sort of the foundation of it all. So it will look largely the same, but I think some of the numbers will change.
Mm-hmm. Of course, the parliamentarian's going to weigh in here, Senator, and I'd love to ask you about what you think survives the bird bath, which is just getting underway here. What would comply with the bird rule, if you will, when it comes to budgetary procedures that end up in a reconciliation bill? I don't know what bird droppings you see ending up on the floor here, but will the current policy baseline method of accounting that was used in the House survive the parliamentarian?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know, but I think it should, because the fact of the matter is that, to your point, it has to be budgetary. So that means it has to, any part of this bill has to either deal with revenue, i.e. taxes, up or down, or spending. The appropriations piece, up or down. And to the degree that there's some policy changes, that has to be, sort of incidental, not extraneous. So no doubt some things may not make it, and there may be some things Republicans in the Senate want that may not be able to make it. On the other hand, there might be some real opportunity there. So the parliamentarian has a lot of, final say over here. We're not likely, if ever, to overturn the parliamentarian on the bird rule. Otherwise, it would be, violating the Senate basically. I don't know what's going to make it or what's not going to make it. All I know is that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, making those pro-growth tax policies permanent, is the first thing we ought to do, and then finding further savings in spending ought to be the other thing. One of the reasons we're doing the big bill rather than pieces of legislation is, you might recall, there's a little PTSD around here from those of us that were here in 2017 when the House first passed repeal and replace of Obamacare, and it failed by one vote in the Senate. I think everyone thought if we put it all together, all of these pieces together into one big, beautiful bill, you'd get more people supporting it. At the same time, you find more things that people can be opposed to. So we'll see if the strategy even works out.
Well, of course, the strategy from this administration is also, when looking at the holistic impact on the deficit, it's one thing to consider the tax mechanism, which can be scored by the CBO, but they also argue tariffs have to be factored in, that the revenue driving force of tariffs will help offset some of these tax cuts. But you just spent time over recess on a congressional delegation to Canada trying to potentially smooth things over with Mark Carney on trade. Is it your opinion that tariffs need to be lowered with key allies like Canada, or that they should remain where they are so that you get the income?
Sure. Well, I think tariffs as a trade negotiating tool are fine, and with that in mind, I don't think every country's treated the same, because I don't think every country behaves the same. And so I do think there's some room for improvement with Canada. There might be room for improvement with other trading partners. What I worry about, and to the degree that tariffs would be considered as part of the reconciliation package, the problem with that is, while you can certainly score a tariff, if you can presume a certain amount of revenue coming from a tariff, I think that's relevant. But it's not relevant to the bill itself unless it's part of the bill. So you don't get to really score it against the reconciliation package. And that gets a little clumsy. But what really matters here is reduction of the deficit, to your point. And that's why I think you have to look at the whole of the Congress, the whole of the administration over the course of an entire Congress, 2 years, not just one bill versus another bill.
Senator, I'm sure you stopped in your tracks as a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee when you saw this attack by Ukraine against Russia over the weekend. Remarkable to see them smuggle drones into Russia and cause the amount of damage they did against the country's strategic bomber fleet. Two of your Senate colleagues, Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal and Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, were in Ukraine over the weekend to meet with President Zelensky and had this to say about it. Bipartisan bill that you support that would impose new sanctions on Russia. Let's listen together.
The Senate and the House of Representatives in the next 2 weeks will be moving forward with a sanction bill that's bone crushing.
There are very few causes that will take 41 Republicans and 41 Democrats, put them on record on a single piece of legislation. It doesn't happen these days. The cause of Ukraine is doing it.
Senator, there are great questions about whether Russia will strike back and how. What would make these sanctions different than prior rounds?
Yeah, so these sanctions are bone-crushing, to Lindsey's point, because they go after not just Russia, it's not just primary sanctions on, say, Russian banks or Russian oil, but secondary sanctions on those that would do business with Russia. And when when other countries are forced with the binary choice of, gee, do we want to be a customer of or a provider or a supplier for Russia or the United States of America? Do we want to face the onslaught of American sanctions, or would we rather hang out with our buddy Vladimir Putin? And I think given those options, it would be a very bleak moment for Vladimir Putin, not just, by the way, because of the drone strikes, but the economic problems that he would be created for him. Well, first of all, he wouldn't be able to afford the war. Too many of even some of our frenemies are helping him supply cash for fighting this war. So I think they would be bone crushing. He should be concerned enough that there are 82 senators on this bill. The fact that they would pass easily, and I think it should incentivize Vladimir Putin to get to the ceasefire and get to the table. And then you throw in the drones and Ukraine's ability to do what they did is really remarkable. But the other thing, as a Senate Armed Services Committee member, that I can't help but think about is our own vulnerability as a nation. We're working on this Golden Dome to intercept and take down missiles that would come from distances far, far away. But we also have to guard ourselves against exactly what happened to Russia, lest we be watching the skies as we get attacked from within.
Could the Golden Dome, we're out of time, Senator, could the Golden Dome have stopped an attack like that with drones, as we saw?
This is why the Golden Dome has to be multi-layered. We think of a dome as just sort of looking out into outer space, looking at ballistic missiles, if you will. But no, you have to have a multi-layered from under the sea, the top of the sea, the ground, underground, and all the way up to space. Right. It has to be very, very many, many layers. And I'm not sure we're as prepared as we need to be.